Hi and welcome back to the channel again this week. I hope you had a wonderful weekend and it wasn't too hectic with everything in preparations for Christmas. And actually, that's one of the reasons I thought to do this video today, because over the last few days, I've noticed just so many cars on the road. It's usually the busiest time of year this week leading up to Christmas. And I thought it's been quite a while since I did a video on the what's known as the auto market. We call it the vehicle market in the UK and a lot of Europe, but in the USA, the auto market. And if you recall before, I talked about all sorts of reasons why there would be issues over the last year. So that was 2022, supply chains and chips and things like that. So I thought today what I would do is kind of recap over a couple of those points, but really talk about 2023 and what you can expect, especially as many of you may work in that sector, or maybe you have a dealership, maybe 5 people watching, or maybe you have a car yourself, which is probably most of you. So I thought it would be a good idea today to talk about autos, vehicles, so that's what we're going to look at. So I actually think that 2023 will be a difficult year for the auto sector. And I can give you a whole host of reasons why I think that is. But it's not all gloom, because I also think that it will be a good year for preparation work for the auto sector. So we'll talk about a lot of the negative things in a moment that I feel are going to come this year, which will affect profitability, will affect jobs, will affect pricing and all sorts of other things. But I do want to also not just focus on the gloomy aspect and talk about some of the positive aspects as well. And that is that we're seeing this emergence or a convergence at the moment in technologies. And I guess we can say, if you think about what happened with smartphones, that was a breakthrough. It was a convergence of technology all at the same time, because you had a mobile device that you could speak on. Early, if you remember, like I do, I got an early mobile phone. I could play a game called Snake on it. So we had games, we had the phone, we could then send text messages, and that was pretty much about all you could do. But then with the advent of the smartphone, all sorts of new things came in, and the development of apps, and you can even have a torch, and your camera and your video camera can now be on your smartphone. So what I feel we're about to go into is that for vehicles. So let me explain why I think that. Vehicles in terms of technology haven't really advanced that much in decades. If you think about the early vehicles and how, yes, they got more performance, they got more efficient, things like that, very, very normal stuff. But now what we're having is this crossroads where technology is coming in, and it's going to turn your car now into a computer. So there's a lot of emerging trends there where you're going to see all of this new technology and therefore new job opportunities in that industry. But at the same time, you're also going to see a decline in gasoline, petrol, diesel vehicles. And actually diesel has already been falling in terms of sales quite dramatically. So a question I get asked a lot is, Neil, I work in the auto industry. Should I jump ship now? Should I go and work in a different industry and get out just before this recession is about to hit? Am I going to lose my job and all these other things? Well, I feel like I've kind of answered that question before when I talked about how I think the next recession will be a white collar, not a blue collar recession. However, I do think it will affect people who work in that industry in some ways, because we'll see less production in 2023. And I just want to start going through some of the more negative aspects now then. And we'll start with chips, microchips. So in 2021, I talked about how we would have this major chip shortage going right through to the late part of 21 and right throughout 22, which I think is probably going to continue 23 as well, maybe into 24. But we do have breakthroughs in that area, in that there are new factories like TSM, sorry, that's their ticker, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. They are going to be building new factories in Arizona. We're seeing a lot more semiconductor factories that are going to be coming online. So that will ease that burden, but they're going to take a couple of years to make these factories. So we're still going to see these shortages then in semiconductor chips, which are desperately needed for vehicle manufacturing. Now, the next point really is the increased costs of manufacturing, and that is because of all the increases in the energy now. So there's so much extra costs, and vehicles are a very heavy industry. A bit like how we talked about Germany, and I said that as we went through 2022 and into late 22, because they just haven't got the energy they require, their heavy industry is going to suffer quite badly. And we've seen that happen now. We've seen it in a lot of different European countries. The heavy industry is suffering badly, or they've just shuttered the factories until cheaper energy comes online. Well, let me just say, I don't see where this cheaper energy is going to be coming from for a while yet. So of course, this also applies to the construction of new cars, new vehicles. Because of all this heavy industry required, there's heavy costs in energy. So these will have to be passed on to the consumer. The manufacturers aren't just going to swallow all of these costs, because they have profit margins and they have shareholders and everything else to contend with. The next point then is all around fuel costs. So we've all seen our fuel prices go up at the pump dramatically. As a result of this, we're seeing disposable incomes getting squeezed. And again, we won't go into all of that because I've covered it on numerous videos before, but that's everything from your food inflation, your energy inflation, and then at the pump as well, we'll include that here. Housing costs, costs for your children, for all sorts of things. The costs have just skyrocketed. What always amuses me is how a lot of economists can't really see the impact of that. And they say, well, you know, the higher prices will just lead to higher wages. And that's not really accurate. What it leads to is more protests and more strike action and a lot of union strikes and things like that, where they're forcing those wages higher. Yes, I'll agree with that. But for a lot of sectors that aren't unionized, or that they just don't have that bargaining power, not everybody is going to see these wage increases. So I very much disagree with a lot of economists on that front. So the increased fuel costs at the pump, what that does, it draws away from other things that you might spend money on. And maybe that's a new car. Maybe you were thinking, I'm going to get a new car this year. I'm going to replace the car I've had for however many years you've had it. And what I think is going to happen in 2023 is that a lot of people are going to put that decision on hold, on pause, because they'll say, you know what, this year is not the right year. My wages are squeezed while inflation is increasing, and I just don't have that disposable income. Let me put it off to 2024. So I feel that is what's going to happen in 23 as well. And that's without even mentioning the increase in service costs because of these supply chain breakdowns. You may have had this yourself if you have an older car, where if you have a new car, the wear and tear on it, the servicing is usually very low for the first 2 or 3 years at least. It's usually a lot longer now for newer models. But if you do have an older car, 7, 8, 10 plus years, you know that things just go on it all the time, small little things. Just last week, one of my bulbs went in my headlight, and I've got to, get it and change the bulb in it. I also need to get a new set of tires this year, for example, as well. So these sort of costs are adding as well because they've increased. Everyone's been increasing their prices at the same time. Supply chain issues have made the shortages a lot worse as well. So you still have the same sort of demand, but actually you've got a bigger demand because people have been buying used over new cars, but you've got less parts, and also you've still got the same amount of mechanics. So we've seen an increase in costs there. And I don't see this going away in 2023 either. Another problem is that repossessions are on the rise quite dramatically, and it's not difficult to understand why. A lot of it will be inflation, but the other aspect is the interest rate rises at the central bank. A lot of people call them the government rate rises. They're not government. It's actually central bank rate rises, which sit separately to the government. The government will do your fiscal policy, but the central bank does your monetary policy. So they're the ones that are responsible for raising these interest rates, which you will have no doubt seen by now. And if you have a variable rate mortgage, you're probably sort of sweating at the moment, asking how much further can these rates go? Well, the answer is not too much further. You're probably going to start to see a dramatic slowdown now, and then they're probably going to pause for a while and just assess what's happening with inflation versus these interest rate rises. But as a result of a lot of this stuff, we have seen used car prices year on year drop by around about 14%, somewhere in that ballpark. Now, is that because there isn't the demand like there used to be on used cars? Absolutely not. There is still a huge amount of demand on new and used cars. But the problem is that there just isn't that disposable income, that there isn't that extra money in household budgets in order to go out and upgrade to maybe you've got a used car that's 10 or 15 years old and you want to upgrade to an approved used car that's only 5 years old, for example. Or even there, people are getting squeezed so much that there just isn't the budget. So what we're starting to see now is year on year, these prices starting to drop back down to more manageable levels. And of course, linking back in with the other point around affordability, loan affordability has dropped dramatically as well. And that includes a lot of lenders opening up to people who normally wouldn't qualify for vehicle financing. So these people now are qualifying. But at the same time, a lot of that category are the ones that are having their vehicles repossessed, falling behind on payments. So with these higher interest rates, it is a lot harder to actually finance new vehicle purchases. The next point then, and this is sort of a hidden giant, I think, is that you've heard me talking for quite a while now, at least 4 to 5 months, about unemployment and how it will explode in 2023. And, you know, I completely understand the criticism and people just don't think this is going to happen. But again, the reason why I believe it will happen and that the other economists have missed it is because unemployment is different to a lot of the other indicators and metrics. It's actually a lagging indicator, whereas a lot of the other indicators actually come up before the crisis begins. So you can see it's coming, but unemployment happens afterwards. It's lagging everything else. So I do think we're going to see that as well, especially when unemployment or employment scarring hits. That's going to cause a cycle downwards. So that will draw even more affordability out of household budgets for new and even a lot of the newer pre-approved cars as well that are used. And I guess the last point, I'm going to wrap up a few points here actually. It's all around the future. So this is 2023. How all the governments are moving towards EV, so electric vehicles, and they're really, really pushing hard for electric vehicles. There's a big problem with this, I think most of you will know, but we'll start with just one or two of them. The first one is retooling. So you think about a lot of the dealerships and the servicing, there's a lot of money to be made here from servicing petrol and diesel vehicles because they require a lot more maintenance and servicing than an electric vehicle. Electric vehicles are very much self-contained. They really don't require as much maintenance. So we're going to see a reduction as more electric vehicles come online. We're going to see a reduction in terms of the profitability of garages and servicing, but also the costs that are required in retooling. I think that's probably the best word to use. From having all of your existing tools, so the servicing centers, the garages, for the petrol, for the diesel cars, but then having this new amount of electric vehicles coming in, which will require a new set of tools, a new set of equipment and diagnostics and everything else. And it will be a lot cheaper. There won't be as much cost and there won't be as much labor required to actually service the electric vehicles. The other point is how the government are really, really pushing this hard. And I mean really, really, really hard. You've seen how hard they're pushing these electric vehicles. But there's a problem. I don't know how many of you have actually stopped and looked at it and just for fun have done the math on creating these electric vehicles. But there just isn't the raw materials available to create the amount of electric vehicles that they want to create. And even if they did, there isn't the infrastructure in place either in terms of generating enough electricity to actually run all of these electric vehicles. It just doesn't exist. And that's without even getting into the ethical side of electric vehicle batteries. If you've watched any of these documentaries and you've really looked into this properly, it's pretty disturbing in terms of the slavery, the child labor, the child deaths, all of these things that exist in that industry. And the government talks about how they're getting all of this cobalt from China and, you know, all this sort of stuff, and they brush it under the carpet. Well, what they're not saying, I mean, it's so easy to just say we're getting this from China, but that's not the truth. China has mines in Africa, in different African countries, and a lot of the labor, you obviously have the big main mines. I can't really speak into that and how ethical they are run and if people are well paid and everything around that. I don't know. I haven't been to those mines. But what I do know is that there are a lot of other mines, and the documentaries that we've seen, that they're out there for you to watch, show that most of those people working in them are children, and a lot of them die every single year. And how much do they earn each day? Well, usually less than $1 for a whole day's work trying to get these rare earth minerals just so we can have these electric vehicles. But of course, when I talk about these things, I'm always told, oh, be quiet, Neil, and you know, this is all for the greater good and everything else. It's always interesting when you hear that, of course. People on their moral high horses about the future and saving the earth and saving the planet. But let's just not talk about those kids over there because they don't really matter. Yeah, okay. And the other thing I find quite interesting, apart from the morals and the viewpoint of certain people around it who just aren't even interested in what I just said, but the other point is hydrogen. So we're seeing now the efficiency of hydrogen vehicles just getting just incredible efficiency coming through. And these could even overtake and replace electric vehicles. I wouldn't be surprised at all now that I've seen a lot of the technology and we've seen just how efficient they are. So that is another thing that could disrupt this EV market. Maybe they could be compatible in the future. Maybe it wouldn't require an entire new processing and new factories and retooling, because imagine they've just retooled from combustion to electric vehicle and then they find out, hold on, this is just not going to work. There isn't the materials, there isn't the electricity generation available, but here we go, here's hydrogen, now we have to retool again. That could be really difficult and really throw a spanner into the works, pun intended. So hopefully that just wraps up a lot of my thoughts, because I do get asked a lot about the auto industry. So I just wanted to wrap up some of my thoughts today as to what I see happening in 2023, but also I wanted to bring in the EV side of it as well, electric vehicles. But overall, I think that the hydrogen side, you're probably going to see more growth there in the future. In fact, the compound growth on hydrogen vehicle technology is really quite high at the moment. So we could see that even replace EVs in the future. So there's a lot of disruption, just to summarize them. There's a lot of disruption in the auto industry. There's going to be a lot of people that might, say, lose their jobs, or there may just be less profitability within the companies next year. Vehicles are consumer cyclical in nature as well. So that means that people put off those sort of larger purchases until later on, especially if they don't have to make a purchase. Let me compare it to something else. Do you really need a new pair of shoes, or are the ones that you've got fine for another 6 months to a year, for example? Well, many people would say it's not a priority. I don't need a new pair of shoes right now. They'll get me through another season. But when it comes to something like food, you say, can I put off buying food for the family table for 6 months? Obviously not, no. So that's what we're really comparing it to here. People are going to have to prioritize their staples, the important stuff in their household budget. All right, well, thanks for watching today. Really appreciate you as subscribers. Take care, God bless you, and I will see you tomorrow.